Dworkin tries to balance ambition and endowment through his entire argument for equitable distribution of resources. As a resource egalitarian, of course, he argues for resource distribution in equitable fashion. Now, endowment and ambition, how he tries to balance, and what is this ambition and endowment in his in his writings and in his ideas. Now, endowment, Dworkin believes, is what we win in natural lottery. Natural lottery is that what we get by birth, something on which we do not have any control. We become poor, some of us become rich, some of become high, some of become low in our IQ, some of become disabled, some of become able. So, all these things are part of that natural lottery which we win by birth or by the fluke of luck. So, therefore, what happens that Dworkin calls it brute luck, and brute luck is advantage or disadvantage at birth which human beings get in society. Now, what we find that this endowment in fact is very important for Dworkin so far as organizing an equal society is concerned, because if you distribute resources equitably, but if you do not take into account these endowments with which human beings are born, then what happens that ultimately you may labor under this impression that you have created an equitable society, egalitarian society, but nonetheless many types of inequalities would remain. So, therefore, addressing this question of endowment is very important in for Dworkin, and therefore, he addresses it frontally. Now, Dworkin factors in brute luck in his distributive scheme, and hence is called a luck egalitarian. Now, how he tries to offset or balance this brute luck with the ambition in the society, that is preferences in society, because as a liberal he does not ignore preferences altogether, but he simply tries to balance preferences along with this endowment, so that in a real sense egalitarian society is created, where people who are born with certain disabilities do not are not handicapped or do not suffer particularly on account of something which was not of their making or not their choice. Now, luck egalitarian as Dworkin is called, it means that people should be compensated for undeserved misfortune, as I have already mentioned those misfortunes. By birth, if someone is poor, by birth someone is blind, by birth someone is handicapped, physically challenged, whatever, that misfortune people should be compensated for, because that is undeserved. He did not deserve it or she did not deserve it, because something came as a brute luck. Now, the compensation should come from only that part of others' good fortunes that is undeserved. That is also important, that where from he wants to compensate. He wants to compensate from those resources which are part of good fortunes of the individuals in society, which he believes are undeserved. So, from undeserved resources or one can say the good fortunes, he wants to compensate the bad fortune of some individuals in society. Now, resources, as I mentioned, for Dworkin are two types: impersonal and personal. Impersonal are wealth, opportunity, etc., and the personal are personal resources are something which cannot be transferred. This can be physical and mental health, innate capacity or incapacity, and so on and so forth. So, therefore, these are the two resources. Now, the personal resources are very important in terms of this endowment, which I have just now discussed. Now, for Dworkin, equal distribution obtains when each person has equally satisfactory overall share of resources, counting their personal resources in combination with impersonal resources. So, therefore, he raises the bar here for creating an egalitarian society. For example, he says that equal distribution can be considered taking place only when each person has equally satisfactory overall share of resources, counting both their personal resources in combination with impersonal resources. So, therefore, if his brute luck is also taken care of, then only one can say that the equal distribution has taken place. Since personal resources cannot be transferred, Inequality in its distribution needs to be compensated by allocating people greater or lesser share of impersonal resources. In fact, that means that people with disability or fewer talents are entitled for financial subsidies or additional opportunity so as to preserve equality in overall distribution. For example, one can say that A and B are two individuals, and if B spends more money on medical needs, he or C needs insurance and compensation, and the society has is duty bound to take this responsibility to compensate for this, because it is a kind of disability which has come to him or her through brute luck. Now, redistribution of impersonal resources to mitigate ill effects of prior inequality in distribution of personal resources is something a very important contribution of Dworkin to this idea of equality. Now, Dworkin's theory, therefore, people believe are both ambition sensitive and endowment insensitive. So, now what we find that Dworkin is trying to balance both ambition and endowment. How he does it? Now, Dworkin constructs a kind of imaginary situation which Rawls also did through his original position, through his argument for a contract in order to derive his principles of justice. So, Dworkin and Rawls both resource egalitarians have taken recourse to this hypothetical construct. Of course, for Rawls it is original position, but for Dworkin it is something else. Dworkin paints it in this way that a shipwrecked immigrants on an island which is full of resources, natural resources, and therefore what happened that people have to distribute the resources among themselves. Now, Dworkin proposes that instead of grabbing those resources, he organizes a hypothetical lottery, or one can say a bidding, and therefore what he does through this imaginary construct, that he allocates certain resources, certain currencies, certain money to everyone to basically participate in this in this bidding, in this lottery, where he or she can bid as per his or her taste or preference. If someone wants to do farming, he or she will will basically bid for farmland. If someone wants to own a beach, he or she will basically do something for fishing. If someone wants to do something else, so according to your preference, your ambition, you are using the resources which you are getting out of the money which is equally distributed in every shipwrecked immigrants on an island which is full of natural resources. And therefore, what happens that this ambition sensitive argument is meant to basically construct a society where the preferences are not smothered, rather preferences are protected through this auction. Now, what happens that island where immigrants are stranded and arranges an auction of resources to enforce individual choice, because as a liberal democrat, choice is very important for Dworkin. So, therefore, he wants to keep choice intact along with taking care of or offsetting the endowment aspect, which is perhaps not normally addressed in a liberal democratic society. Now, what happens that after this lottery, there is a very intricate argument given by Dworkin. I do not have time to go into the details, but I will just briefly mention some of the highlights of this imaginary auction, which he does in order to arrive at these principles of egalitarianism. What Dworkin says, that what happens that even if the money is equally distributed, 100 pounds or 100 rupees to everyone to participate in this auction, and they participate in terms of their own choice and ambition, and they buy things as per their own liking, but nonetheless that is not all. But what happens that the people, those who are participating, are unequal in certain respects. Even if you distribute resources equally among them to participate in auction, but nonetheless some background inequalities will remain, and that background inequality is nothing but endowment. That the people are challenged, some people are challenged, physically challenged, mentally challenged, and challenged in different respects. So, therefore, how can they participate equally in this? And there comes this entire question of endowments, and this endowments he tries to offset through a very interesting and intricate argument that these natural endowments, which is a brute luck, has to be compensated by the society has to take the responsibility for compensating this, and this compensation has to be, particularly this brute luck has to be cut down, and by the choice with resources which are equal, but not only through choices, but this has to be cut down through insurance policy to equalize natural endowment. Now, this insurance policy means something that you are basically robbing the Peter to pay the Paul. In fact, in the sense as I mentioned earlier, that the brute luck is compensated by certain other good fortunes of other which are undeserved, as he mentioned earlier. How he does it? I told you in the beginning that he does it through a proposal which is basically similar to what normally we see today, insurance policy in a society, that insurances but the responsibility lies with the society, but also not only insurance, but one can say that the way taxation policy is arranged and organized in liberal democratic world, the taxation, what is taxation? Those who are more resourceful, those who are more able are taxed heavily, and those taxes are spent for the welfare of those who are slightly disprivileged and those who are basically under distress. So, therefore, taxation can be a very good analogy for insurance, and this insurance would essentially be meant to offset this brute luck or endowment with which some people are basically suffering. So, this is how Dworkin does it through his imaginary argument of auction ambition sensitive and endowment insensitive a framework which he proposes to create an egalitarian society. So, the most important contribution of Dworkin, therefore, one can see here coming in terms of this endowment aspect, which was basically missed out by a very important resource egalitarian Rawls and all other modern thinkers or the theorists in recent years who have looked at this question of egalitarianism. Now, that brings me to the next school of thought, welfare egalitarians. Now, what is this welfare egalitarians? Now, welfareism, as normally it is understood, is basically was first proposed and advocated by the utilitarian thinkers like Bentham and others, Mill and others. Now, the contemporary welfare egalitarians, G. A. Cohen and John Roma, have resurrected that argument in a different way. In fact, the classical welfareists, that is utilitarians, were targeted by the resource egalitarians like Rawls and Dworkin, because both of them advanced their theory against them. Now, welfare here, as perhaps was in the case of these utilitarian thinkers, refers to preferences, satisfaction and happiness. That how happiness is perhaps the index of a good society, pleasure, pain, as you have seen in context of utilitarian thinkers. Now, this happiness and preference are very central to welfare theories, and they believe that one person has more welfare than another if more of his preferences are satisfied, or if they their experiences, and if they experience their life subjectively more enjoyable. So, therefore, the definition of a welfare society for welfare egalitarians is that when the preferences of each individual is taken care of. Now, preferences may vary. Some people may have a preference for a champagne, some people may have a preference for something else. So, therefore, they have a subjective preferences, the responsibility lies with them, but it is the responsibility of the society to satisfy each and every preference, and therefore, if that is done, then one can say that it is a welfare society. Now, ideal of equality according to this welfare egalitarians is not equal resource distribution, whether people enjoy similar level of, but rather it is whether the people enjoy similar level of welfare or not, and welfare in terms seen in terms of satisfaction of preferences and happiness. Now, there are many criticisms of this welfare egalitarians. It looks good that preferences, every individual's preference should be satisfied. I have a preference to drive a costly car, my preference should be satisfied. If someone's preference is only to have 2 squares meal, that preference should be satisfied. So, therefore, if everyone's preference which he or she has made for himself or herself is satisfied, then for these welfare egalitarians, society can be called egalitarian. Now, there are many criticisms, but 2-3 criticisms are worth noting here. The first is fulfilling ambition has a weakness, that fulfilling everyone's ambition sounds good, but Amartya Sen argues that what about people who often alter their desire and ambition in light of circumstances, which he calls adaptive preferences. For example, because of the circumstances, people sometimes lower their preferences due to the oppressive situation in which she or he is placed. So, therefore, the preferences are not situation neutral. Preferences are product of situation and circumstances. So, therefore, simply focusing on preferences and satisfaction would not be good for for creating an egalitarian society. Similarly, Dworkin also is very critical of welfareists. As I mentioned that they are normally critical of utilitarians, both Rawls and Dworkin, and welfareists in particular, the way they have given importance to preferences. In fact, Dworkin calls it champagne test. In fact, this welfare view will recommend welfare view according to Dworkin will recommend giving more resources to people with champagne taste who need more income, but Dworkin argues against compensating for taste and preferences. Dworkin believes that if there has to be any compensation, this compensation should be only for endowment and brute luck, not for these costly tests like champagne test. If he or she has gone for champagne test, then he or she should be made responsible for it, they should pay for it and they should suffer for it. So, therefore, the welfarists believe that sometimes preferences are part of personality which is product of childhood socialization, and therefore, human beings individuals who have gone for these costly preferences and choices should not be victimized, because that is not their making, that is the product of their childhood socialization. Perhaps the argument which is not bought by thinkers like scholars like Dworkin. Now, that brings me to the third school among the resource egalitarians. This is the capability school. They are called capability egalitarians, and the two names as I mentioned earlier also, one is Amartya Sen, another is Martha Nussbaum. Now, according to these capability egalitarians, we should compare how well people are faring by looking at their capability to function in a particular way, and function here means what a person can do or can become. Now, capability egalitarians believe that capability is effective ability to achieve a functioning or a combination of functionings. For example, reading is a function and literacy is capability. If someone can read, someone has ability to read, then that ability turns into capability for him and he become a literate. So, therefore, reading is a function and literacy is capability. Not all functionings are equal and valuable. Rather, the capability egalitarians give importance only to particular functioning which is essential for living a truly human life. Now, whereas resource egalitarians will argue for distribution of resources like books, and other external resources, the capability egalitarians, would argue differently, because for resource egalitarians, books will help people in gaining literacy, particularly where it is low. Capability school will focus on internal ability to read and write instead of giving them books and and a bag to carry the books or any other external support through which the literacy can be attained. Rather, the capability school will simply focus on making a person able, ability, instilling ability in him or her, that is internal ability. For Amartya Sen, who is the most prominent advocate of this capabilities egalitarianism, for Amartya Sen, axis of inequality and human diversity is to be factored in while talking about egalitarianism. For internal characteristics in human being, such as age, someone is of old age, someone is of young age, sex, someone is male, someone is female, ability, for example, someone is not able to read, someone is able to read, all these factors along with external circumstances like ownership, social background, environmental background, if combine both sets of factors, then only you can aspire, or you can move in direction of creating an an egalitarian order. So therefore, they focus on capability, the ability, the functions, but nonetheless they do not ignore the external factors like ownership, pattern in society, the social background, and many other backgrounds which people live. So therefore, this is to be remembered that capability is central to them, but nonetheless they believe that internal characteristics like gender can be made worse in presence of some adverse external factors like discrimination and patriarchy in society. So they cannot be ignored also. So I mean, a combination of both external and internal perhaps is the the highlight of this capability school. For example, Amartya Sen and Martha Nussbaum have focused extensively on this question of identity and social discrimination, because they believe that these factors deepen inequality in society. Now with this we come to but before I just wind up this discussion of resource egalitarians, I mean the distributive egalitarians, the third school, that is capability school, let me discuss 2-3 criticisms of this capability egalitarian. The first is that it requires definitive list of human functioning. If you are to compare different people's respective levels of advantage and disadvantage, Martha Nussbaum has tried to come up with a list of this, but nonetheless it is considered not very exhaustive. And the second criticism is there cannot be a comprehensive list of capability in spite of some of the efforts made in recent years to develop that list. Now that brings me to the second school of thought so far as the contemporary egalitarians is concerned, and it is the social egalitarians. As I mentioned earlier also, the social egalitarians described a looser, social egalitarians can be described as a looser bundle of ideas concerned with the quality of the relationship that obtain within society. Now advocates of this view believe that egalitarianism should aim at the eradication of hierarchy, subordination, oppression and domination to form a society of equals. Now they do not believe that distributive equality is the best way to capture egalitarianism as a moral and political ideal, the way perhaps the resource egalitarians argue. In fact, there are many advocates of social egalitarianism, like resource egalitarians, like distributive egalitarians. Social egalitarians are also divided into many subgroups. I will just briefly take up some of them now, but advocates of social egalitarianism are these days the dominating political theory in terms of their contributions, and there are many advocates, and some of the advocates can be identified as prominent advocates: Nancy Fraser, Charles Taylor, Michael Walzer, Maurice Young, Anderson and David Miller. They can be considered as most prominent faces among these social egalitarians. Now social egalitarians have different arguments to offer in support of their the perspective. Now Maurice Young talks about structural equality, Michael Walzer talks about complex equality, David Miller talks about equality of status, Anderson talks about equality, democratic equality. So I mean they all four of them, you can see that how they have looked at one particular aspect from the perspective of the social egalitarianism. One thing we should also remember that many of them incorporate from each other, and therefore sometimes one can say that there are a lot of exchanges among them. Now Philip Pettit eyeball test is another important argument so far as social egalitarianism is concerned. This eyeball test, which can be called in Hindi aankh milana, that if people in society can see eye to eye with each other, then one can say that there is no domination in society, it is a non-hierarchical society and society is equal. So therefore the social status is totally equalized. So Philip Pettit's eyeball test is a very important argument so far as this entire social egalitarianism is concerned. Now Walzer and his idea of complex equality is very important here to discuss. Walzer has a book, Sphere of Justice, and in fact Walzer believes that elites in hierarchical society may be able to convert their success in one sphere to advantage in another. For example, wealthy people exercise disproportionate influence over political decisions, when political representatives have preferential access to medical care. So, one can see here that how influence in one sphere, that is economy, that is wealthy people, has penetrated into political sphere, or similarly the influence in political sphere has spilled over to the medical sphere. So, therefore, his argument is that normally this happens with the elites. Now, to correct this, he proposes a form of complex equality, not the simple equality which he associates with resource egalitarians. Now, complex equality, according to Walger, aims to ensure that inequality in the distribution of one good does not influence or distort distribution of other goods. Now, the same distributional standard, according to Walger, cannot be applied in all spheres of society. In economic sphere, the kind of distributional logic or argument one adopts need not be extended to other sphere, that is family. For example, in economic sphere, need sometimes inequality to differentiate hard worker and the lazy worker. So, therefore, you give incentive to those who are putting more effort. Here, incentive and disincentive play important role. And therefore, you give reward according to the efforts. But that does not mean that in family also you adopt the same principle of distribution, that those who are efficient, those who are brilliant children in the family, you should give more food to them, you should pamper them. So, therefore, market inequality cannot justify family inequality. Now, goods are created differently in different spheres, and hence the distribution criteria in different spheres need to be different. Now, this is the criticism of Rawls and others resource egalitarians who have argued for a universal principle of distribution. So, therefore, Walger targets them. All distributions are just or unjust relative to the social meaning attached to them. At the point of production of a good, different types of meanings are attached, and therefore, different principles of distribution need to be adopted. The second person is Maurice Young and structural equality. He believes in theory of operation. It was later developed by other multiculturalists and feminists. Maurice Young has given a multifaceted character of operation. Two features he highlights: operation is experienced by groups such as men, black men, ethnic minorities, immigrants and disabled people. And number two, operation is a structural injustice which is woven into the institutions that govern our collective lives. Maurice Young, tries to look at, he looks at operation through 5 different ways: through violence, through marginalization, through less meaningful participation in public sphere, powerlessness in influencing decisions, cultural imperialism, that is stereotyping, and then exploitation, that is unpaid domestic work, particularly the women the way suffer. Anderson has added stigmatization in this long list of operation charted out by Maurice Young. Now, finally, you have Charles Taylor and the politics of recognition. In fact, it is a looser form of politics of difference. Misrecognition as operation is the highlight of this school of thought. Differential treatment to different people in society because of their social situation. Distribution of recognition is done unequally. Dates associated with majority religion is made a public holiday, officially recognizing some languages whereas ignoring others. These are the part of recognizing and disrecognizing, leading to inequality and oppression in society, and therefore, this politics of recognition tries to offset or balance this thing through their argument. Now, there are many criticisms of politics of recognition, but Brian Barry's criticism is very important. He says that additional emphasis on minority culture might instill inferiority complex, and number 2, it ignores individual rights as a group members, and number 3, it leads to cultural relativism, and number 4, it ignores intra-culture and intra-group operation. Therefore, these multiculturalists as a whole and these advocates of politics of recognition are responsible for this. With this, we come to an end of this discussion. Thank you.